Oh, the flowers in the garden are beginning to bloom.
Those plants which do reside in the garden are beginning to show their colors.
The garden is bursting forth with life as the flowers erupt from the soil.
Springtime herself has beckoned forth the new growth from the plants, and yea, they do now keep her company.
A speckle of heaven hath made its appearance in our garden as beautiful and wondrous new shapes arise out of the plants.
Had never before the word bloom been said, now it would spring from our mouths to describe these here flowers.
God's voice in color doth join us from the tips of these sweet saplings in the garden. Therefore do I feel my divinity here as my fingers do crush the soil.
Oh, the peasants in the street must be filled with riches and gold, and the king must be upside down in his chair, for the world is changing in unforeseen ways. As I look upon the garden, the flowers doth sprout and bring upon great tendrils and beautiful spirals.
Aye, as Achilles' heel was pierced by an arrow, so too now is the ground pierced upward from within, for the seeds that did reside have now taken fruit.
What have I done that is so shining and true that it would deserve a reward as sweet as this that I do now? My eyes pierced with the finery that this earth can wear. Yea, I know not, and I will question not, for I would not scare these precious buds back into their stems.
Yes.
Oh.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Muprov Musings. This is episode number 18, and the first episode of our new Shakespeare series. I'm one of your hosts, Hal Munger, and joining me now on the line is your other host, Julian Bernardo.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Muprov Musings. We are very, very delighted for this episode to have on a guest who we have no reservations in saying is the best improviser that we know. Feel free to introduce yourself in terms of whatever way you want to, but welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Hi. Hello, listeners of Muprov Musings. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you, Julian and Hal, for inviting me. Yes, my name is Lisa Rowland. I'm an improviser in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I know these two through Stanford. We worked together at Stanford, and as coach and TA, as players, and so that's what I'm doing here.
Hey.
And Shakespeare happens to be one of my very great passions. Like, I love improvising Shakespeare.
Yeah, we were kind of wondering about that. I know that you also like have the Bechdel test and the naked stage, but somehow I associate you as like Shakespeare person. I was wondering how that came to be, whether is it actually one of your all-time top formats, or like how is it?
I mean, the cool thing, the thing I like about Shakespeare is it's a format and it's a genre. Like it's a genre and a time period. It has all things put together. You can make format choices with it, but the things that make it so wonderful, I just like so to answer your question, yes, it is one of my all-time top favorites. I love doing Shakespeare. It brings me so much joy. It feels like a playground. And not all formats feel that way, but Shakespeare's like, oh my God, it feels like unleashing is what it feels like to me, which I recognize is ironic in a way because a lot of people feel so bound up by Shakespeare because they're afraid of getting the words wrong, or like they don't know they don't feel free improvising in that format. And I feel so free improvising in it. And I think that the pieces of it that make Shakespeare wonderful make improv great, like make for really great improv. So there's great agreement there.
Yeah, well, let me dig a little bit there. What about the format makes you feel like freer than other formats when it is like such a specific format?
Yeah, well, it's a specific genre, and those two things are different, right? Like there's like format choices and there's style stuff. But the things that I like about it are how enormous the feelings get to be, and how beautiful it is. So you get to use this. I get to use this part of my brain that I really love, which is that sort of how might these words be written, and how can we paint a picture to help the audience more fully engage in the emotional content of what is going on here. And that is like the wordplay there happens to really appeal to me.
Right.
Specifically. So I recognize that is a passion of mine, is words and ways we can paint pictures with words and choosing words. And like, I love that part. And the playing of it is just, I just love how heartful improvised Shakespeare can be if we can get out of our head. I think that's the tricky part.
Right. Speaking about the head, though, like Shakespeare is, I think, particularly a hard format, like you alluded to, because of the language thing, and speaking in Shakespearean tongue. How do you kind of think about that when you're doing improvised Shakespeare? Like, how conscious is it as like a thing that you're activating, and how much do you emphasize it when you teach it to other people as well?
It feels like a response. There's two pieces of this, and one of them is one of the things that makes Shakespeare sound Shakespearean when we're talking about the language. There's like other things we can do that make Shakespeare feel and sound Shakespearean that are not just language. But when we're talking about the language, there's grammar, like hath and hast and doth and dost, and there's those Shakespearean sounding verbs that there is a correct way to use those. And so we want to, when I teach it, I do teach that there is a correct way to use these. These are not interchangeable. You can't sprinkle them wherever you want. So that's one thing that I think gets people in their heads.
Right.
The other piece is choosing poetry. And that's a skill set that is much less about getting things correct and much more about having very deep feelings and then finding ways to describe those feelings. And there are a set of Shakespeare-specific tools that can help us describe those feelings in ways that will make them sound more Shakespearean. Like calling on the gods, or like making biblical references, or like these things that Shakespeare did a lot that leans further into Shakespeare town. But generally, and I think one of the things that helped me love Shakespeare and not be tied up in it is that I did a lot of scripted Shakespeare before I became an improviser. And so it almost feels like I have a familiarity with the language,
right? Like
I would have a familiarity with a foreign language that I have a lot of exposure to. So I have it, I think, comes more easily to me what sounds right and what doesn't sound right when it comes to that the grammar piece, because I spoke that language a lot. You know what I mean? So if you don't have that background, I think it does come a little bit harder, because it feels like, wait a minute, how did that go? And what if you don't have as much exposure to when to use this conjugation versus this other conjugation of a particular verb that we no longer use, you know?
Yeah. And part of why we're choosing it for the podcast in this next series is because it's something you can kind of learn in audio form, and that a lot of it is this kind of linguistic thing. But we were wondering, with this there are certain improv formats that are, I think of as kind of skill-based formats, like musicals and Shakespeare, or like anything where you're using accent, where there's kind of an underlying skill that has not really anything to do with improv writ large necessarily. And it also is usually a personal skill. So like if I'm worse at the language, it doesn't usually affect my teammate that much, or as much as me being worse at saying
collaborating
yes
or listening.
Yeah. And I was kind of, we're both, Julian and I were wondering whether how you felt about skill-based formats and what you felt like was the appeal of them, or if there was anything, do you prefer them to kind of just improv without some overlying thing? And are there any that you are bad at, and that or have you had the experience of not having mastered the skill yet and being like, would that put you off, or was it still fun to be kind of messing up? And I don't know.
To think about that. Yeah, I know what you mean by skill based. There's this part of me as an improv teacher that's like, they're all skills. All of them are skills. Like, listening is a skill, and attention is a skill, and acceptance is a skill, and singing is a skill. But I also understand your distinction. There's like a technical mastery of this particular ability with regards to singing or the language or something that you're talking about. Let me think about that question. I mean, I happen to really love both improvised singing and also improvised Shakespeare. Like, I really love them. Probably it is because they come easier to me, and it feels like flying. Improvising songs feels like flying, because that when the musician is following you and you're following the musician, and you're doing things that are and singing feels like a sacred thing. Singing feels like this. Singing feels like flying in general. It feels like one of the great things that humans can do is like sing together. And so when you combine that with the surprise and delight of improvisation, it's just like drugs, it's like awesome.
Well, so or maybe then is like, do you feel like it's worth, you put in the time to master the skill? Do you feel like now you're somehow more comfortable than you would be even in a normal scene where there wasn't the Shakespearean language, or you can kind of enter the flow and just be like, the words are carrying you along?
Oh, like when I'm in a non-Shakespearean scene, does the fact that I have developed a set of skills around Shakespeare help me?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
The question? It's not your question.
That's not your question, but that is on our list of questions.
That is on our list, yeah.
So I do think that the skills you master in Shakespeare, or that you practice, the skills that you practice in order to do improvised Shakespeare, help no matter what. Like, help any improv you do if you choose to carry them over, which I don't always. But those skills, the things you practice that are not just the beautiful language part, but feeling things deeply, saying what is true, proclaiming your relationships. Like, it always happens in Shakespeare when it's like, Henrik, my brother, it's like, what a helpful thing. In normal improv, to just say how you're related to the person that you're on stage with. It's like very, very helpful. So there's so many things that, because Shakespeare was operating under the same performance conditions that improvisers do, without sets, without costumes, without a program explaining the story, without anything else, there was all this stuff that he had to paint pictures of where his characters were, using the words that they said in order to get his audience to see it, because we don't have sets or projections. And in the same way, improvisers have to do that. Like, we don't have sets or projections. We don't know where we're going to wind up. And so we have to get used to the skills of speaking those, like saying those things out loud and painting the picture so that our audience can see where we are. And those kinds of parallels and resonances I find very exciting between the Shakespearean art form and the improvisational art form. So that's one question that you didn't ask that I will answer. Is there another question that you did ask that you'd like me to answer?
I think you were hitting on it when you were saying the feeling of flying, of just sort of like, what is the appeal to someone who has yet to put the time into mastering Shakespearean language, and they're thinking, well, why would I want to do that when I already can improvise? Like, I
think if you don't have an answer to that question, then you don't want to do it, and you don't need to put the effort into it. Like, I mean, honestly, it feels like not every kind of thing is for everybody. Like, some people really love improvised Star Trek. I see it, and it's not something that I'm going to like pour a lot of my hours into, probably. But that's not because it wouldn't be a great time if I did that. It's just like, the time is limited, and it would be an amazing time. And also, or if it doesn't spark you, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
If it does, I think the thing is, if it does spark you, if you're like, God, that's so cool, but it feels so far away or feels so hard, then absolutely the message to you is, no, it is 100% within your reach. And there's all sorts of things beyond the heady sort of, you don't have to be fluent in another language in order to, like in the Shakespearean language, in order to do this well. There's a lot of things also outside of that grammatical, heady, intellectual part that makes Shakespeare feel Shakespearean that are available to you now. So it's a composite of all of these things together that will sell that package. But if you have to be convinced to do it, don't do it. Do the things that really light you up. Don't
Well, as we're talking about sparks and actually like being really into doing Shakespeare, one way that might attract some people is we're wondering if you would share one of your favorite memories from a Shakespeare show. If you have any Shakespeare shows, either on a very micro scale, there's something very interesting that happened, or even a run of shows that you really loved for some particular reason.
Totally. There's like so many sort of moments flying through my mind. This was like a particularly cool moment. It was at the end of a maestro. So I don't know if you two are familiar with what maestro is.
Yeah, I think, well, I know of it. I've never done it.
Yeah. So it's like a bunch of improvisers, 18 improvisers or something on stage doing rounds of scenes. And then there's eliminations between rounds based on the scores of all of the scenes. So like every scene is scored. The players in those scenes get scored. You do multiple rounds. So you rack up different numbers of points every time you perform. And then the ones with the most points at the end of the night are the maestro, or the one with the most points is the maestro. It's like a elimination until there's one left. And it was an international festival. So this is why like the stakes were high. This made it particularly memorable. And I don't know if this is, anyway, there was just some improv magic in the air. The stakes were high. I was one of two people left. So we were like, all right. And we had to do 2 solo scenes. And the beautiful thing about Maestro is that their directors are there to try to delight you and help you succeed. And they knew that I loved Shakespeare. And they said, would you do a soliloquy? And I was like, twist my arm. So I like got up and the spotlight came on and I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do. Oh, I know. They were like, do it about, I said, what's a suggestion? What am I holding in my hand? And they said, a cell phone, like an iPhone. And I was like, okay. So I like was looking at this iPhone and I addressed it the way that like in that Hamlet soliloquy, you like address the skull, I like held it aloft and I addressed the cell phone. And then somebody in the audience broke their glass, like dropped a glass and broke it. So it's like a silent auditorium. And then you hear the crash of a glass. And I was like, that's it. And it took me on this awesome thing about how I wished I could crush this. Like that is the sound that I long to hear of the screen cracking in my hands, for I feel shackled to this thing. It was all about sort of like my relationship to this phone. And it came from this. Do you hear that?
No, we don't hear that.
Seriously? Oh my God, that's great. There's a drill in the other room. Okay.
It's the perfect timing.
I know, this is totally offers. Yeah, so this offer came out of the darkness and like led me through this soliloquy, and it was just awesome. So that's just a magic of improv story.
Yeah, but it was in Shakespeare verse to some degree.
Yeah. I just love Shakespeare, man. I just love it. It's like, so many little moments of like ending a show and feeling like, oh my God, what just happened? And you can also like the stories can be so epic. Like they can last over generations and be adventures and like go to the sea and go pirates and ship, just like everything. And it's so fun that way.
Oh yeah, Lisa, I wanted to run. So the last time I artistic directed Shakespeare, I broke down the plot structure. We're just doing comedies. And I broke it down into like 5 little stages that I wanted to just run by you, also for prepping people who are going to hear the future episodes, learning how to do it.
Cool.
But our first act was kind of love arrows. So like point yourself loving someone else. And if you and the other person both love each other, there's some external reason why you can't be together. And if the other person doesn't love you, you're fine. But like love that doesn't work in the first act. And then the second act was some sort of plots and plans. Either you had twins in the first act, in which case you're good, or someone's gonna start dressing up as someone else, but people are gonna look different, and you're having some sort of plot. And then act 3 is what we call the fun zone, which is just bump into characters thinking that they're other characters and just have a lot of scenes that are just further and further confusion. Lots of problems that are all fake problems. That can all be resolved if you had the right information, but it's like, oh no, this person, I overheard this thing, they didn't love me, blah, blah, blah. And the fourth stage was either some sort of counter plots where the good guys figure out what's going on and they counterplot against the villain, Or there's just like an event is happening somewhere where we're all going to gather. And the fifth stage, we're all in the same location. Oh, what? You were wearing those. And you realize, oh, we're all the same people. There were no real problems. Those all got married. That was how we did just like basically all. It was kind of like this self-contained improv bubble. I just wanted to share that with you. I wasn't sure whether you had a way like that of like thinking about, how do you think about when you approach a Shakespeare plot? How is it different for you than a normal, the normal plot of, say, like a long form narrative show?
Yeah, like the circle of expectations is different. The kinds of things that happen in a Shakespearean world are different. And so I feel like I'm just playing with a different deck of cards. Mm-hmm. But with that different deck of cards, there's a million different combination of hands that you might get dealt. But it's you know, the set of options is a little bit different, but they could combine in any way, you know. Mm-hmm. Mostly I approach it the same way, sort of on an approach or a mindset level, and I'm just dealing with sort of like different options that I might pull up. So like letters, mistaken identities, hijinks. I mean, in some ways, Shakespearean comedies are like farces, which a colleague of mine defined as big desires, bad decisions. You really want something, and when you go for it, it doesn't work out the way that you thought it was going to. Like something gets in the way. Something is complicated about it.
That's funny.
But it really could, you know. But it could be so many things. Like maybe there's usually love is a part of it somewhere. But I also really like letting the plot surprise me. Like, in some ways I approach long form Shakespeare in the same way I approach other things, which is you want to play a character who wants something badly. Mm-hmm. And in Shakespeare, it is nice to have distinct subplots, which I don't think as much about in straight ahead sort of contemporary long form in that same way. But it's nice to introduce a set of characters, somebody who wants something, and then introduce a different set of characters, somebody who wants something, and then trust that those things are going to collide somehow or intersect somehow. But it's like lay a really strong groundwork of fully fleshed out characters who care about each other and who want something, know what they want, and then send them on their way trying to get it. And usually one of them wants somebody else, but sometimes they want adventure and they find love along the way. You know, like maybe that's how it works. And usually somebody ends up in love, but that deck of cards could be like you throw it in the air and it could land in any kind of combination is the way that I've usually played.
Mm-hmm. So to get then at the kind of format genre dichotomy with Shakespeare, do you feel that mostly in your experience, you take it as a genre and impose less like format restrictions when you do Shakespeare?
Yes. The format restrictions that sometimes I impose are like last time I directed Shakespeare, I was like, I'm going to make the decision that we're doing comedies. It was summertime. I was like, I actually just don't want to do a story where that ends with bodies strewn on the stage. Like I just don't feel like it. So I'm going to make that call. Although there's nothing wrong with it. I love a good tragedy, but it was just not my mood. So I was like, number one, we know we're going to do comedies, meaning happy ending. Mm-hmm. In whichever way, it's a happy ending. The brother and sister reunite. The people fall in love. We get married. We get back home. Like whatever the thing is, we discover the treasure. And the second thing is it's going to start with a prologue and it's going to end with an epilogue. I knew I wanted to start with a prologue and end with an epilogue. And after that, see what happens. Use your storytelling skills and tell a story.
Interesting. And do you feel that like doing Shakespeare like this is particular to Shakespeare, or do you find that you are just less intrigued in heavily structured formats in general?
I think that is true. I'm less intrigued by heavily structured formats. I think that if there's a real strong format, it's going to put me in my head.
Right.
And then I'm going to spend more time focusing on what's supposed to happen next in the formula and less time on like, oh, I got a hit, you know, because then I'll be like, oh, I got a hit, but does that count as the step that comes next? You know? And so I think that's why I'm I'm more interested in getting really good at storytelling, understanding the playing field we're on. And that's what I mean. But it's like the deck of cards we're playing with, or the playing field we're on. It's like, it contains these kinds of things. Like, what are the tropes? What are the themes? What are the devices? What are the theatrical devices? What are the plot devices? What's the kind of storytelling that we're doing, so that we're all on the same page about that. And then we just tell a story. So that we are not trying to get it right, or worried if we didn't do the right step in the right order or whatever.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, to me, there seems to be like a trade-off, I guess, depending on just what your ensemble is. Like, if you have an ensemble of people who are, kick-ass at narrative and know all the Shakespeare stuff, then it seems like probably the best way to do it would be like you say. But it seems maybe easier for like an ensemble that is maybe newer with each other or something like that to maybe impose some format restrictions to make sure that things go more smoothly.
100%. I call it scaffolding. It's like, like the more scaffolding there is, actually, the freer the players can be. And maybe this is the thing. It's like, you want to optimize the amount of scaffolding you give for the players you've got to make them feel the freest. And if you're playing with folks who aren't as accustomed to building sustained narratives with one another, or they are just less experienced or whatever, having a wide open stage might actually be not freeing, might be very I do not trust that what we're about to do is going to go well, right? Which would lock them up and make them scared. So scaffolding allows people to play a little bit better. And then when you have players who've been playing for 40 years who are like, actually, the thing that is going to make me feel freest and most inspired is like, let me go, then it's like, okay, then kick off the scaffolding and go. And the latter is who I play with at Bats, right? Is folks who've been playing for decades. And so the lighter touch, the structure, the better it goes, I think, in general.
Yeah. Whenever I'm teaching, I'm always like, take I'll say how none of the rules are never break this. This is a rule, like, where I'd be like, okay, maybe like 30% of your shows should try to have some twins in them. Maybe like 1 in 6 has a shipwreck, like that kind of. And I was like, all right, we're doing no tragedies for this run. And then we got the suggestion, blood on the leaves. And it was like, all right, we haven't practiced tragedy, but everybody was dying. There were like elves and giants and stuff that wasn't even really that Shakespearean. Stephen was solo on the drum.
It was sort of like The Hobbit, right? Like there is like an overlap sometimes.
Yeah, it was funny. So,
that's great. I know the thing that I have to remind people of is not every Shakespearean comedy has fairies. Like, fairies show up in one play. Maybe 2. Like, there's sort of these like supernatural sprightly characters, the witches in Macbeth, there's Ariel in The Tempest, and there's Puck and the fairies in Midsummer Night's Dream, but like mostly fairies are not a thing. But in improvised Shakespearean comedies, they're there 85% of the time. Like, there's just always fairies who are like making mortals fall in love,
Well, I'm interested, so it seems like you take Shakespeare more so as a genre, but have you had experience doing Shakespeare where you take like some parts of the genre or maybe some of the format restrictions and you do it outside of the Shakespearean setting? Because we had tossed around for a long time, like, oh, let's do like a modern Shakespeare. Let's do a modern Shakespeare. And we never did it for one of our shows, but okay, talk about that, please.
Totally. I've never done that for a long form. I know companies who do. Down in Brian Lohman taught a long-standing improvised Shakespeare class that was all about modern Shakespeare. So taking the Shakespearean tools and placing it in like a contemporary workplace or something. Like, this is going to take place in the break room at an insurance company. We've done short form where we take a genre and then do it outside of the setting of that genre, right? So like Shakespeare in a Manhattan apartment or something, and it's even more delightful. I mean, it's awesome. And then it really is linguistic. It's linguistic and emotional. Right. You're not doing the other, because you're taking it out of the genre. You're taking it out of the time period. And so you've just got to isolate. Okay. So aside from the things that happened in this particular time period that mostly is evoked when we talk about Shakespeare, what makes something Shakespeare? And it's language, it's poetry, it's emotions. It is sometimes plot devices, right? So it's like you're dealing with your plumber and then you like plunge his wrench into your heart because he doesn't love you back. Like that's very Shakespearean, right? It's sort of like operatic. Yeah.
Yeah. With that, like in terms of like switching things up, modernizing, dropping tropes, how do you handle gender when you play improvised Shakespeare? Because there are a bunch of different ways when you have a form that's kind of laden with gender stereotypes. You can ignore them all and play in a kind of genderless world, or you can have some of them. But how do you handle that?
Great question. Sorry to cut you off. We're on a podcast. I need to remember not to talk over you. And the way that my favorite way to deal with that is that's one of the things we're not going to pay homage to in terms of like historical accuracy. Anybody can be anything, and it's not the point. So if I am a woman who is heir to the throne, the point is not that I am a woman who is an heir to the throne. We're just telling a story. You know what I mean? Like we just accept that. So I just like we're just opening it all up. We're going to open it all up, and anybody can be anything, and relationships can be made up of people of either sex, and and that's not the point. So we're living in just another parallel universe.
Yeah, that's what we would do as well. We had a practice where we were doing like practicing inverting gender tropes of like, okay, let's get the female improvisers practice like, okay, you're gonna be the creepy aunt, or like someone who's trying to marry the younger man, or like male improvisers, you guys are getting ready for your ball and you're prepping your suits and like doing your hair, like that kind of stuff of like getting comfortable with characters just behaving in whatever way, because the tropes are very fun, but
totally
it shouldn't be a limitation onto the players and characters, and people are more likely to end up playing characters who are the same gender as them. So you might as well mess around with what was
blow open what's possible with those characters, right? Like anytime you play a genre set in the past, it's something you got to grapple with. It's like, are we holding tight to the ways that gender was at this time, or are we not? We realized at Bats there's this joke a little bit that like all of the Shakespeare scenes begun with a woman brushing her hair, talking about how she's engaged to a man she doesn't love. Like that was like the way that Shakespeare plays started. And it was like, no, can we just look for something else? Like what other part of the world can we inhabit and can we live in? Like, let's just branch out.
Sorry, Hal, I'm going off doc, but I want to ask about support in Shakespeare, because as we talk about this and we think about the skills, it seems like a lot of the skills that you can build in Shakespeare are very kind of self-focused. You can go out, deliver an amazing soliloquy, and really express all of your emotions in that way. And so when I think about people who are stars at Shakespeare, I think about those moments. But what are some big ways that people can be very supportive to their fellow players in Shakespeare? And also, do you agree that Shakespeare is a format that has a lot of opportunities for self-showcase, I guess?
Yes, I think that in fact Shakespeare runs the risk of turning into a pissing contest, like a show. It is absolutely possible to get really showboaty with it. It's like, look at the amazing things I can do with my words, and look at the amazing things I can do with my words. And my belief is like, if all of those words are not like supported by deep emotion, what are any of them for? Like the words are elevated to support this elevated emotional experience in the stories. That's why we speak in these flowery ways, is because we are feeling things really deeply. The stakes in Shakespearean stories are very high. And so oftentimes the place where Shakespeare goes wrong for me, I think, or when I'm watching improvised Shakespeare and I'm like bored, it's because I'm like watching you show off your tricks, and now I'm watching you show off your tricks, and like none of it has any emotional content to it. So yes, and there are incredible ways to support, because all of the for instance, I think one of the greatest and most generous things that anybody could do on stage is be like, tell me more about how you feel. You're sort of setting somebody up for a soliloquy. Or there's this really fun kind of wordplay that sometimes I do when I teach improv, which is one person compares their love to a something, to a banquet, to a feast, to a ship, to the sea, or whatever. And then the partner can be like, if your love is the sea, what be her eyes?
Mm-hmm.
And then they can be like, oh, her eyes are pearls nestled inside the oysters in the deepest depths of the sea. Yay. And then what is her hair? Her hair like the shining seaweed that doth flow most fluidly, whatever. Yay. And then what are her feet? Her feet are like the coral that doth reach to the, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So like, but it takes both people. It takes this person to sort of enter into the wordplay and this person to be like, to goad them on, to sort of fuel them and ask for more. Those kind of support skills are just the same in other kinds of improv, where it's like, I'm going to use my skills to shine a light on you.
Right.
And invite you to feel more deeply into your experience, which is like to learn more about what you care about, to find out what your goal is, to like, ask you questions or make endowments of you, to like give you backstory. All of that stuff can happen regardless of genre, but the wordplay piece of it is nice if you're looking for ways to sort of play games with your partner or set them up for, tell me about it. Dun, 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 dun. Like the place where there would be a song, there's a soliloquy, and your partners are so helpful for setting that up. And then the most generous thing of all is not talking while you are in the middle of your soliloquy, which is a very difficult skill.
Right.
Like stay out of it, let them go, just let them have their moment.
Yeah.
Lisa, with that exercise, kind of citing backwards, a lot of the exercises that we're going to be teaching people on this series, I learned from you. You taught me how to do a lot of the Shakespearean improv. Which ones of those are like Lisa originals? And then how did you learn how to do Shakespearean improv? Or did you have someone that we can continue to cite, up the tree in terms of?
Well, yeah. A simp before me, I want to say Ryan Laponis maybe was a guy who was a simp. He was like a junior or senior when I was a freshman. Mm-hmm. So we overlapped, but he was heading out as I was heading in. And I think and Dale Stahl, he was in my 103 class, but also older than I was. So we joined Sims together. And he was a big Shakespeare. Like he also directed me in The Tempest when I was an undergrad. And like we did Shakespeare together. And then also we were improvisers, and Ryan is who I remember teaching me that metaphor circle. Like my emotion is like a this, for like a this, it doth whatever, building the muscle to compare your feelings to an external object or something.
Yeah.
So I got some of that from them, and the quibbling piece, I probably got it from Monty Koshnevasan, also a former simp, and Jen Cho, also a simp. All of them are really great at Shakespeare. Sarah Neff, I remember doing Shakespeare. We did. Here's a moment of Shakespeare that from your earlier question. I was an undergrad. We were doing Shakespearean long forms. We would ask the audience whether it was a comedy or a tragedy, and then if it was a tragedy, we're like, how many deaths? And if it was a comedy, then it was how many marriages, right? So we would get the suggestion from them, like how many people get married, and then as people died, we would like mark off, like tally up the deaths until we knew we were like getting the right number, which was just a gimmick. But the cool thing was that we performed in front of the gates of hell at the Rodin Sculpture Garden. And we were doing this tragedy in front of the gates of hell because they have these like lights that are always trained on them. It was nighttime. It was a battlefield scene. It was like 2/3 of the way through the play. Somebody was dead on the ground. Somebody else was like kneeling over them, mourning them. And it began to rain. And it was like, and the person who was playing looked up and was like, yes, wash away this sight or whatever, right? Like made the rain a player in the moment. And it was like, oh my God. the magic that comes anytime the universe gives you an offer and you use it, but the fact that it was so dramatic and perfect,
Yeah.
it was perfect in that moment. It was like so cool.
Uh-huh.
So most of my Shakespearean stuff either came from old Simps or I came up with it.
We had a moment where we were outside in the Robley courtyard doing a crazy Shakespearean style run thing just on our own. And there was like a great flood that had been going all, and it was like, how are we going to get out of this? And then all of a sudden a bird flew over. And it was like, oh, there must be land. So there are these kind of fun, like in an actual Shakespeare show, if you go to see it outside, it's like delightful when something like that happens. Like you go see The Tempest in the Rain. But in an improvised Shakespeare, it's just way, way, way more delightful because the whole show gets to just change around it.
Because those things that happen are offers that shape the course of the show, which you don't have the luxury of doing in a scripted show. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think if we can, it would be nice to just kind of hammer out some of your like nitty gritty preferences about Shakespeare. For example, what kind of cast sizes do you like for Shakespeare?
Oh, 7.
7?
0 to 30, with 0 being super scene and 30 being the hardest format that you've ever done. How hard would you say it is?
I mean, it doesn't feel hard to me.
Well, that's
but
what
I recognize that.
I agree.
What's that?
I agree. Just to like for you personally, because I agree that it's actually not that hard of a format. I think that it's
for me personally, or like a genre, because I just like love it so much that it's like, oh my God, it's my treat to do this. It doesn't feel like work at all. So sometimes super scene feels like harder work than Shakespeare.
Okay, so 0. Lisa's coming in with a 0.
Yeah.
Did you ever do Shakespeare with like costumes or any, fun kind of auxiliary things?
Yeah, I used to do out of a class that I taught at Bats. Actually, we did. Rebecca Stockley is also a place that I got a person that I got a lot of Shakespearean improvised Shakespearean stuff from, to give credit where credit is due. Where I taught a class at Bats, and out of it came a group called Shakespeare Stepchild that we used to perform free Shakespeare in the parks. We would like show up in parks of San Francisco and do an hour-long long form in like tunics and like tunics and leggings and boots. And so it was like, because one of us was a middle school drama teacher and had like access to costume rooms, it was great. Yeah. I think, and when I do it, I try to do, when I direct it, I invite everybody to wear things that are evocative of a time period. So things with blousier sleeves, that sort of off-white color, black pants, boots, like belts, things that are not just like black pants, solid shirt, which is sort of the improv uniform du jour. But I've never done it in like full, like bodice, like, skirts, the whole deal. But part of that is because you never know who you're going to play and what's going to be needed. So I prefer to do something that is suggestive of costume instead of full costume.
Yeah. Shakespeare shows often have, different levels of information between characters, lies, secret, mistaken identities. How do you keep all that straight in your head, in particular for something like Shakespeare?
Repeat it 9 times. When you lay out a plot on stage, repeat it, say it, repeat it. And then have the person you just told say, let me get this straight, and then repeat it. But I actually prefer stories that don't have a lot of subterfuge for that reason. It's like too easy to get. When we don't have those visual cues of what's going on, we can't be like, oh, because now I'm in this other costume, but the audience can see that it's really me. Like, we don't have any of the trappings that help us fool each other and the audience. And so it's just too much to keep track of. So the way that I do it is be wildly obvious that it's happening. Meaning, like, when you come on stage and you're pretending to be somebody else, talk to the audience and say, yay, here I am in the vestments of my brother, for the world will think I am a man. And then do the scene so that it's just completely clear what's happening.
Yeah. I think when we last did Shakespeare, we had like kind of a grab bag of costumes kind of behind the stage where we could put on things when we were, taking on a different identity, which I think made it easier to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
I got done dirty by that though. The one show where I decided to wear a dress for the show, I showed up instantly. It turned out some of my extended family had come to see the show, and the title was The Monkey King's Son, and I got endowed as a monkey instantly. So it was really hard to move around, and I was like, oh man, I'm never wearing a dress in improv ever again.
Forget this. Yeah,
it didn't turn out to be true. I have done it since, but it was...
Yeah. The one time that I've worn a dress and been really happy about it is when we were doing improvised Dickens, and we did a fully costumed improvised Dickens. It was beautiful. We got costumed by the ACT costume shop in San Francisco. So we knew we were playing our gender, and we knew the time period we were in, and we weren't going to have to do anything else but things that could be done in a full, like heavy wool skirt and petticoat and, like the whole thing, because that's who we're playing. And so it actually lent this like beautiful air of reality to it. But if you're playing more unpredictably than that, without that decision that you're going to play your gender and all of that, then it's harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am selfish, and Lisa, you are in short supply. I think that this also applies to anybody who's listening to this who will be directing Shakespeare, but I myself am directing a format right now. And as a longtime director and an improv teacher, I wonder if you generally have any advice for people, read me, on directing in improv and making that transition in their improv career.
Oh, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is like, yeah, great. Do it. Your idea is good enough. Go get it. Like, go after it, that idea, right? So just the confidence part of the transition of like, I don't know, try this. Directing is just like improvising in a way, in that you are not fully responsible for what happens. So take some pressure off. Allow yourself, if you're working with people that you trust, then allow yourself to explore the things that are on your mind, the questions that are on your mind with the cast that you're directing, in order to make some of the decisions. And then the other piece of advice is, I don't think it's counter to what I just said, but maybe it's counter to what I just said, which is know what you want and be specific about your vision. One of my personal pet peeves is when I ask a director, like, great, so what are we going for? Like, do you want us to, are you looking for us to all play people who know each other? Are you looking for us to all be strangers? Like, whatever the question might be. And they go, well, anything would be fine. And I'm like, tell me what you want. Like we all know that when the show happens, unpredictable stuff happens, and we'll go with it. Yeah. Like, of course, obviously we will go with whatever's happening, but I would love to know what you're shooting for here. So have a well enough defined vision that you can tell your players what you consider to be success as far as the format that you're directing is concerned, right?
Yeah. So
it's like, I want variety. I want to make sure we have different numbers of people in every scene. The show that I'm directing now, I really want us to be bold. It's a musical show. It's the holiday musicals at Bats right now. And so it's like, there's a couple of things that I'm like, this is what I want us to do. I want us to do that. Will it be okay if something else happens? Of course it will. It's an improv show. Of course it'll be okay if something else happens, but this is what I want. And if we don't do that, then after the show, we'll be like, great, we did these things really well. We didn't quite get these things. Let's try it again next week. But be clear about it. It doesn't make it a bad show. It means we didn't quite do what we were shooting for. So honesty around that is important. And like, my favorite thing is when somebody's like, here's what I want, and they're willing to direct in the moment in rehearsals and stuff. Like, oh, try that again. It looks like you're mugging to the audience a little bit. Try it again, but like, play more sincere. Or I'm going to stop you there. This feels like a great option for if this were this kind of show, but we're going to try to tow it closer to this other line or whatever. Like, if you know what you want, let your cast know what it is.
Yeah.
And know what you want.
Yeah.
And if there's things where you're like, this actually doesn't matter to me, then that's also fine. The other thing that feels important to me, just on my directing rant, is if you are in a mode of like the setup, this is a little bit different for Simps, but the setup for Bats is like, okay, there's one required rehearsal or two required rehearsals in order to be eligible to play in this show. So you're cast in this show, you've got to attend one or two rehearsals in order to be in it. I would love for those rehearsals not to be spent where the director is figuring out what this format is. Like, hold an exploratory rehearsal to figure out what the format is. Show up when people have given you their time, prepared to tell them what the format is. Like, if you have explorations you need to do them where that is expressly the purpose of the gathering, and not when it is a rehearsal for the show.
Makes sense.
Because it feels like a waste of my time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, we don't want to waste your time here. So, Julian, do you have anything that you're trying to get in before the last question?
Just to say that the penultimate piece of advice you gave sounds a lot like one of my favorite Lisa-isms, which is strong opinions lightly held, which is something I say so much. And I also just want to, fanboy my other favorite Lisa-ism that I just told my cast at this last rehearsal, which is to stand in the wings like a sprinter, ready to cut the scene. I just think,
man, that sounds great. I love it.
Yeah.
Strong opinions lightly held is very similar to the thing you were just telling us in the Shakespeare world, with like strong emotions that go wrong, or like
big objectives, bad decisions.
Big objectives, bad decisions is almost the exact same sentiment as strong opinions lightly held, just a little worse.
Yeah. I
feel like the last time I talked to you, I was saying that, I'm thinking about trying to come up with another name for long form narrative improv, and you were like, I don't think it needs a name. But I don't know whether you had heard our reasoning for the Mew thing yet, and I wanted to.
Oh no, I don't know what that is. What is it?
So the three elements, I'll do Julian ping pong back and forth. The first one is Mew, kind of like muse, like the Greek root of like, you'd invoke the muse before telling like an epic story. This is going to be a story of epic proportions. It's long.
The second mu goes to the Greek letter mu, which in the field of statistics universally represents the population average. So that gets at the B average portion of improv that we were trying to invoke in Muprov.
And the third part is mu, which is a term from Zen Buddhism, which kind of can either mean nothing or no. And it kind of gets at both the kind of coming on blank and the emptiness, but also at the idea that in this kind of narrative improv, you can have characters who are disagreeing in agreement, and you can say no to your partner while still accepting them along the way. So
that is a beautifully nuanced choice of a word.
Oh, thank you. That's we're very excited. Yeah, I still get why maybe a word is not needed, but we were happy to fall upon this word.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. I love that. Why do I think that another name is not needed? Because I actually think that the cooler, more nuanced, extended stuff that we do under the name of improv, it just elevates improv in the eyes of the world. And that's what I want to do, because it is what we are doing. And improv is so easily shat on in the world, especially in the performing arts world, that it's like, no, do really kick-ass stuff that people haven't seen improv do before and call it improv, because that's what we're doing. Yeah. So it's not just like the dumb stuff. It includes the dumb stuff, but it also includes the profound stuff. And some of the dumb stuff is profound. And like, it just feels tricky to be like, we don't do that. We do this. It's like, no, we all do that. We all do all of this. And some of it works and some of it doesn't. And some of it is dumb. And some of it is profound. And all of it is part of it. And it's risky. And some of it is going to fall flat and be nothing, and some of it is going to be life-changing, and like, it's improv. I think that's it. I think there's something about it that says, I'm going to call this something different because it's different. It's like improv can be a million things, and I like that about it. And I think the more cool stuff we do with it, like the stuff that you guys are doing, the more, maybe this is naive, but like the more respect the world gives it, because it's like, it's still a pretty young art form in the world, modern performance improv hasn't been around for that long, So I like the idea that we are populating it, as it is called, with a lot of different flavors and seasonings. I think that's why I felt that way. And I also really love the word that you've chosen.
Oh, thanks.
Great.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we were never meant it to be a separate thing. It was always a subheader was what we were going for, of like, this is a type of improv that you can
yeah.
But awesome.
Yeah, well, we really are eternally grateful for you to come on this podcast and share your wisdom with us. We do want to give you one final opportunity to say pretty much anything you want, plug anything that you're doing right now, or if you don't want to plug, share a TV show you really like or anything like that.
Oh, God, great. Well, I'm directing musicals at Bats on Saturdays in December. So if come see some holiday musical vignettes based on your experiences, the audience. So if you're in San Francisco, come check it out every Saturday in December, except for the 23rd. We're taking that night off. And also the Bechdel test is coming up again in March at Bats. And I'm really excited about. So I'll just kind of I'll plant a seed here, but Saturdays in March is also going to be the Bechdel test. Those are my plugs. What do I want to say? Take care of each other. That's what I want to say. That's what I'll put out into the world. Show up like an improviser, be bold, curious, accepting, and attentive and playful. Like that's my wish for the world. And my last thing is, it's so fun to geek out on improv with you guys. So thank you for like having great questions and letting me dive into the nitty gritty. Cause it's like, I love that stuff. So
thank you so much for coming on, Lisa. This is everything we could have dreamed of. And we are going to be, if you're excited by all the Shakespeare stuff, over the next, 9 or so episodes, Julian and I are going to be teaching you everything that you need to know to put on your own Shakespeare show with your own ensemble. Years from now, if you're part of Simps and you're like, no one's done this in 5 years and you need to reboot, or if any group is out there trying to learn how to do this, we're hoping to provide that resource. So keep tuning in to the next episodes. And Julian, you have anything else? Or this has been Muprov
Musings.
So my sign off is that I'm going this spring break from the preschool to go visit my partner who is currently living in Russia. We're going to meet up in the middle in the Europe. And that happens to align perfectly with something called Impro Amsterdam. And Lisa, I wanted to ask you about it because I've been hearing from Will Gutzman, who was a previous guest on the show, that like, I don't know if this is how you would phrase it, but he said that you had been drafted as part of like an elite team of improvisers from around the world to like kind of be the Avengers. And I don't know what, but I really want to hear about what that is and if you're excited.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I really love that framing. We have been assembled to take down the improv supervillains that are threatening the improvverse. Yes, that's a nice way to put it. Yes, I am performing at Impro Amsterdam. I am a part of a collected international cast from all over the world. So there's a Mexican improviser and an American improviser and a Canadian improviser and a Polish improviser and people from all over the place coming together to create sort of the festival cast, the international festival cast. And I get to be one of those, including an amazing Norwegian musician named Marcus, who is like phenomenal. I played with him at one other festival. And then also a technician, an improv technician. So part of the ensemble is tech. And so there's a bunch of players, there's a musician and there's a technician. And I'm like, could not be more excited about it.
We love that. Wait, so you are Improviser USA.
I am, yes.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. It's the Improv Olympics.
And I actually talked to Will, who might be there, like is toying around with the idea of coming to the festival. So this could be this amazing reunion, Simps reunion in Amsterdam. Yeah.
Do you have a format?
I'm not directing anything. I'm sort of going and being along for the ride. The show slot, the thing I would direct would probably be the Bechdel test, but the show slots are 50 minutes. And I was like, it's just like, it's too hard to make that format work in 50 minutes. And so I just get to be plugged into what other people are doing, which I actually is like a happy place for me, is like, yeah, show me what we're doing. Like, I don't need to own this. It's like lovely. But I am teaching and I am directing. So one of the things in the festival that's really cool is you can sign up with a duo to do a duo show that is new. Like you can propose a new show. And as part of that, you get coached by one of the international cast members. And so I have been enlisted to coach a duo show that is going to be performing at the festival, which is really exciting because I don't know them or what they're doing, but we get to come together and like jam on it a little bit. So the whole format of the festival is so exciting. I think there's going to be so much improv there and so many exciting people, and it's going to be a thrill.
Could people still sign up for that? Could Will and I like go get coached?
No, I think the show submission portion is done, but there's a bunch of classes happening, and I don't think all of them are sold out. So by all means, while you're there, see if you can plug into a workshop. Not with me. You get to work with me all the time, but with somebody else from far, far away. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
See me now, like you did back then. See me now, I should thought you cared. All these times they're changing. And my mind is rearranging. Can't you see me now? Like you always did. Can't you see me now? I just wanna be with you. When the times they seem so crazy, can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? See me now. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Everything is changing. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me